right, well, we are at noon, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. So we have plenty of time for our program today. So good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, Florida's Fauna and Folklore. I'm Katie Kelly. I'm the Special Programs Coordinator here at the Orange County Regional History Center. I'll share a little bit of information about our organization for anyone who may be attending a Lunch and Learn for the first time. The History Center is located in downtown Orlando. We offer 3 floors of permanent exhibitions, renowned special exhibitions from the Smithsonian, and a variety of interactive, unique experiences and programs for guests of all ages. While the History Center is partially funded by Orange County, donations to the Historical Society of Central Florida are vitally important to the center's ability to serve the community and continue to fulfill our mission to serve as the gateway for community engagement, education, and inspiration by preserving and sharing Central Florida's continually unfolding story. Donations allow for the care and upkeep of the historic collection, presentation of special exhibitions, and offering innovative programs. I'm going to put a link in the chat for anyone who's interested in supporting us and supporting the museum and the Historical Society, and there are a variety of ways that you can do that. Today's program is being facilitated as a webinar, so that means that attendees do not have access to your video and audio. We will save some time at the end for questions, so please feel free to put any questions that you have for our presenters in the chat as they come to you, and we'll address those at the end. Today's program is part of our series of Mythic Creatures programming, inspired by our current temporary exhibition, Giants, Dragons, and Unicorns, The World of Mythic Creatures, which will be running through January 23rd. I'll share some information at the end of the session about other great programming that we have in this series. So without any further ado, we want to make sure we have plenty of time for our presentation today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our presenters today. Our program today is being facilitated by our research historian, Melissa Procko, and our chief curator, Catherine Duffy. So Melissa and Catherine, please feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everybody, for spending your lunch break with us. We are excited to share a little bit about some of Florida's fauna and folklore. Unfortunately, we're not able to fit it all in as much as we would like, but there are still some really interesting tidbits, factoids, and even an interactive experience at the end. So please hang on if you can for that. As Katie mentioned, today's Lunch and Learn will share depictions of Florida's famous fauna and how these stories and interpretations can permeate and spread into popular culture, whether those are interpretations that are accurate or inaccurate, as we will see. As Katie also mentioned, that this presentation is part of our Giants, Dragons, and Unicorns, The World of Mythic Creatures exhibition programming, which is now open in our 2nd floor gallery. We highly encourage you to visit the exhibition. It includes various interpretations and stories of mythic creatures from around the globe, including dragons, mermaids, sea monsters, unicorns, and many, many more. And we also have a local creature feature in the exhibition. We talk about local mascots that are inspired by some of the mythic creatures, mermaids from Weeki Wachee Springs State Park, the Skunk Ape, and more as well. There are several interactives throughout this exhibition. It's very family friendly, and we have some free days coming up, which Katie will share at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's get started on our first creature, which is the American alligator. So just a quick overview of the alligator. Its closest relatives can be found living over 100 million years ago in the Cretaceous period. And for about 8 million years, the modern day alligator has been living on Florida soil, largely unevolved. So it's very, very old. When Spanish explorers who first encountered the creature, they named it El Lagarto, which means the lizard, but humankind's relationship with the freshwater reptile can be traced back for millennia. They appear in many traditional stories and folklore in Florida, and today, the American alligator is so popular that it's the official state reptile of Florida and Louisiana and Mississippi. So bear with me, I have like 5 screens going, so every transition is a little slow. So we're going to examine some of the folklore and depictions of the American alligator over centuries of storytelling. And we are going to start in the 16th century with Fort Caroline. So Fort Caroline was established in 1564 by the French. It was located along the St. Johns River near what is now Jacksonville. And the reason our story begins here is because an artist and cartographer named Jacques Lemoyne traveled to Fort Caroline, where he lived, and studied his surroundings. He created drawings, illustrations, and watercolors of what he saw, including the Timucuan people and their daily lives, as well as all of the flora and fauna and natural world. Now this is Theodore de Bry, and it's commonly believed that Lemoyne's watercolors were used by this engraver we see pictured here, de Bry. De Bry and his sons published a multi-volume series of these engravings based on Lemoyne's work and other images of the New World. It was ubiquitously spread across Europe and beyond. But de Bry himself did not travel to the Americas, and the engravings he was basing his illustrations on were almost 30 years old by the time this multi-volume series was published. And this engraving by de Bry, which was from one of Lemoyne's watercolors, depicts the Timucuan hunting and killing alligators here in Florida. Now, it's worth noting, of course, that the inaccuracies of the depiction of the alligator, its exaggerated scale, it's coming out of this tempestuous sea instead of this placid swamp we would normally find an alligator lurking in. The very inaccurate representation of its snout and its head. And it's worth noting that this was really shopped across Europe for decades in helping other people try to understand what the New World was like. And so the reason why we highlight this example in this presentation today is to help understand how easily misrepresentations and exaggerated concepts can be shared and perpetuated over time. Next, we're going to look at the American alligator, through another explorer, William Bartram. Now, my slide is not cooperating, I apologize. Now, William Bartram was a Pennsylvania botanist, ornithologist, naturalist, and explorer. You might be familiar with his name and with his work, and that of his contemporary, John James Audubon, the father of ornithology to many. Bartram traveled through North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, documenting the flora and fauna of what is now the southeastern region of the United States. Beginning in March 1774, Bartram began his journey to and through what was called at the time East Florida. He traversed the St. Johns River and the surrounding areas for about 9 months. And his documentations of these journeys included many beautiful watercolors and drawings of birds, flowers, reptiles, insects, from what must have largely felt, we can only imagine, like a bountiful wilderness full of beauty. However, Bartram's encounters with the American alligator were not so beautiful and majestic. He often wrote about in his travel journals about many dangerous encounters. And after he embarked from Georgia to East Florida, he wrote several times about those encounters. And I've selected a few excerpts I'd like to read today about some of his retellings of those encounters. So, the evening was completely cool and calm. The crocodiles, as he called them, began to roar and appear in uncommon numbers along the shores in the river. Greedy alligator, behold him rushing from the flags and reeds. His enormous body swells. His plaited tail brandished high floats upon the lake. The waters like a cataract descend from his opening jaws. Clouds of smoke issue from his dilated nostrils. The earth trembles with his thunder. when immediately from the opposite coast of the lagoon emerges from the deep his rival companion. They suddenly dart upon each other. The boiling surface of the lake marks their rapid course, and a terrific conflict commences. Later, he writes, hundreds of thousands of them were caught and swallowed by the devouring alligators, referring to fish. I have seen an alligator take up and out of the water several great fish at a time and just squeeze them betwixt his jaws, while the tails of the great trout flapped about his eyes and lips ere he had swallowed them. After watching the alligators attack the trout, he wrote, the floods of water and blood rushing from their mouths and the cloud of vapor issuing from their wide nostrils. He noted he began to tremble and goes on to say, sensibly, so it turned out, as an alligator attacked his boat, belching water and smoke that fell upon me like rain in a hurricane. This is very descriptive depictions of these encounters, and he does often describe alligators as having smoke or vapor coming out of their nostrils. Now, perhaps they were exhaling, but I think we can all agree that that's just not a very common thing to witness. And this is one of his illustrations of the American alligators. And so you can see in Bartram's depiction, who's a very talented and accurate artist, has this very exaggerated depiction, almost serpentine, of these alligators. They look more like plesiosaur dinosaurs than they do the long plated alligators that we might see in a swamp or a marsh. Lastly, we're going to explore the American alligator through the lens of another individual, Zora Neale Hurston, famous folklorist of Central Florida. So Zora Neale Hurston was born in Alabama in 1891, but at a young age, she and her family moved to Eatonville, Florida, which is one of the first self-governing all-Black municipalities in the United States and was founded by people who were formerly enslaved following the Civil War. Hurston went on to become a writer, folklorist, anthropologist, and a playwright. She collected folklore and oral histories for the American Folklore Society from Black communities across Florida, and especially here in Central Florida. Many of these stories can be found in the Library of Congress, and in fact on their websites. A lot of the oral histories you can listen to today. Hurston, as I mentioned, traveled throughout Central Florida and collected through oral histories and through her own writings, many different folk tales about the alligator. She herself described folklore as, and bear with me on this one because there's a lot of mention of the word plate and platter, folklore, as in all other forms of human behavior, the world is a great big old serving platter, and all the localities are like eating plates. All of the plates get helped with food from the platter, but each plate seasoning to suit itself on the plate. And that is what is known as originality. So essentially taking all these different elements and each location does it a little bit differently. She goes on to say, if Florida lore is richer, it is because the lore and lushness of other states and countries have been heaped on Florida by her great attraction for workers. So here we see a watercolor created by Kelly Pedersen. It's a depiction of one of the folktales that Hurston writes about called Uncle Monday. This story was collected by Hurston and describes Uncle Monday as a voodoo priest in Africa who has the ability to transform into a crocodile. One day he's captured and enslaved in South Carolina. He eventually escapes to live among the Seminole people in Florida, continuing to be able to turn himself into an alligator at will. Stories of his powers travel, and a woman named Judy Bronson, who also practiced magic in her own way, claimed she was as strong as Uncle Monday and that she could undo any spell that he cast. So to teach her a lesson, he brought her to a swamp and set an alligator to guard her. As day turned into night, terrified Judy eventually confessed that his magic was greater, and she was eventually found and returned to her home by the townspeople. So a lot of these tales that Hurston writes about, many of them, I should say, do have come from stories of African descent or have some mention of that. Other folk tales that she's documented that we don't have time to go through all today, but include how the gator got his mouth, how Brer Rabbit got his tongue worn out, and how the gator got black. And so you'll in a lot of these tales, you'll also see this character of Brer Rabbit and Brer Gator and their interactions with each other. So next.
So now we're going to discuss the Florida panther a little bit. So Catherine has control of the slides, so I apologize if I have to take a break every once in a while to let her know when we're ready to go to the next one. So the Florida panther is actually one of more than 25 species of puma. The scientific name is Puma concolor cori, and concolor means one color in Latin. The subspecies name cori comes from naturalist and hunter Charles Barney Corey, who is pictured here. He first named the Florida panther Felis concolor floridana, but since that was already used for a subspecies of bobcat, it was later changed to Felis concolor cori in honor of Corey. And then the Florida panther was later reassigned to the genus Puma. Now, Corey described panthers as comparatively shy, and he has an incredibly descriptive account of panther hunts. And unfortunately, while Catherine has these great accounts and stories of alligators, for panthers, they tend to be mainly stories of hunting them, which can get quite disheartening after a while. But this panther that Corey is pictured with here, he describes in the story of the panther hunt how she ran a short distance before climbing up a tree, and how she, quote, was quite ugly, charging the dogs savagely whenever they approached her. And he continues to use the word ugly to describe the panthers that he is hunting in his stories. So this panther that he's pictured with was a female, and she was 7 feet from nose to the tip of her tail. But now females typically will measure around 6 feet, and they'll weigh between 50 and 115 pounds, while male panthers can measure nearly 7 feet and weigh between 100 and 160 pounds. So adults are a uniform tan color, which is where that concolor, one color in Latin, comes from in their name. They have lighter fur on their lower chests, belly, and inner legs, while Florida panther kittens are gray with dark spots that will gradually fade as the kittens grow older. Typically, those spots will be nearly completely gone by the time they are 6 months old. Panthers will select their habitat based on the availability of prey. So they'll select habitats that make their prey vulnerable to stalking and hunting. So an ideal habitat for a panther would include a forested habitat, a marsh swamp, and some prairie grasslands. Panthers are strictly carnivores, so they typically hunt deer, hogs, raccoons, and other medium-sized mammals and reptiles. They will also stalk birds and even prey on pets or livestock. And then fun fact, panthers do not roar at all, unlike some other cats that they may be related to. Instead, they communicate through other sounds like growling, yowling, or snarling. So panthers were once abundant in the eastern United States, but as white settlers moved to Florida, they were considered a threat to livestock and resources. In 1832, county courts in Florida established a panther bounty, and a law was later passed in 1887 that authorized the payment of $5 for panther scalps. Today, habitat loss is one of the primary threats to the panther population, as well as vehicle collisions. But in 1995, there was a genetic restoration plan implemented that released 8 female pumas from Texas into the breeding range of Florida. These Texas pumas were closely genetically related to the Florida panther. And the idea was that by releasing them into Florida, that would mimic gene flow, since the lack of gene flow that was occurring in Florida would eventually lead to the extinction of the panther. So 5 out of the 8 pumas that they released did produce a total of at least 20 kittens. And while the genetic restoration plan had beneficial impacts to the genetic health of the Florida panther, and there was an increase in panther abundance since then, today the panther is still restricted to less than 5% of its historic range. So in 1958, the state protected panthers from legal hunting. So they removed that bounty of $5 and they were removed from the game list. But the population continued to dwindle, and Florida panthers became one of the first animals on the federal endangered species list in 1967. And today the National Wildlife Federation estimates that there are only 120 to 130 Florida panthers left in the wild. So panthers are often a subject of folklore, and they do play a large role in the legends of the Seminoles. I tried to find a video of Seminoles telling their origin and creation story, which is really quite fascinating. But if you're interested in learning any more of that, I would recommend checking out the Apathy Museum down in Clewiston. There are also some great resources through the State Archives of Florida, including some recordings and videos of storytelling sessions from the Florida folk festivals over the years that you can access through Florida Memory. So in 1982, the Florida panther was voted by students across the state as the official state animal of Florida. And a number of schools and sports teams have panthers for their mascots as well, from Florida International University to the Florida Panthers of the NHL down in South Florida. Locally, we do have the Dr. Phillips High School Panthers, but Orlando once had a Panther team of their own as well. So in 1966, the Continental Football League's Newark Bears moved to Orlando, and the team became the Orlando Panthers, and they played their games over at the Tangerine Bowl. The team was actually quite successful. They didn't finish a season with less than 10 wins, and they actually had 2 CFL championships. But due to financial difficulties, the team was dissolved in 1971. Before they were dissolved, however, they did make history by signing in 1970 Patricia Palinkas, who was the first woman to ever play on a men's professional football team.
Okay, we are now going to move from land to sea and talk about the manatee. I didn't mean to make that rhyme, it just happened. But before we talk about the manatee, we're going to talk about the mermaid. So stories of mermaids can be found across many continents, from Europe to Africa, even in Inuit communities in the Arctic. Most often they're depicted with the head of a woman, long hair, having the tail of a fish or a porpoise. And across many mermaid myths, they can be described as seductive or dangerous, and occasionally they're considered auspicious, bringing good luck and even gifts to those that they encounter. Christopher Columbus made 4 voyages to the New World in 1492, 1493, 1498, and 1502. Certainly during these journeys, he must have been very curious and possibly even skeptical of what he would find. In a letter during his 1493 voyage, he explained, "Down to the present, I have not found in those islands any monstrous men, as many expected, but on the contrary, all the people are very comely. So these ideas of myths, whether they were sea creatures or monsters or beasts living on these new areas that are about to be explored or in the process of being explored, existed during this time of travel. So notions of gold and spice and land weren't the only thing on the minds of these travelers. Also in 1493, Columbus wrote in his journal, "On the previous day, when the admiral went to the Rio del Oro, which is now present-day Haiti, he said he quite distinctly saw 3 mermaids, which rose well out of the sea, but they are not so beautiful as they are said to be, for their faces had some masculine traits." Now, today we believe the sirens that Columbus saw were actually manatees. And the West Indian manatee, or sea cow, can still be found floating in the waters of Florida, the Caribbean, and northeastern South America. Centuries later, in 1803, explorers brought a manatee skeleton to England and claimed that it was the skeleton of a mermaid. Even England's magazine of natural history published about that skeleton. About 6 feet long, the lower dorsal vertebrae suggested the idea of powerful fish-like termination, whilst the 4 legs presented to the unskillful eye an exact resemblance to the bones of a small female arm. And certainly looking at this photograph of the skeleton of a manatee and a juvenile manatee, you can see how someone might misinterpret the bones as being possibly that of a mermaid, particularly looking at the phalange-like skeleton of the hands, the rib cage, almost like a human, but then tapers into the tail of a leg or the tail of a fish, or a dolphin. But of course, we know mermaids are not real. And actually, manatees are a close relative of the elephant. They slowly graze on the seagrass in the waters of Florida. And they are also listed on the endangered species list. They are listed as threatened. They often fall victim to boat collisions and propellers, loss of habitat, and deadly algae blooms. And today, much like the panther, they are one of Florida's most iconic animals. So before we move on to the final fauna of today's presentation, I encourage you to have your chat boxes ready because Melissa is going to quiz you.
So now we're gonna get into a little more, some more fun stuff. So the study of animals or cryptids that are not formally recognized by scientists is called cryptozoology. Florida's famous cryptid is the skunk ape, also known as the swamp ape. This creature, similar to Bigfoot or Sasquatch in North America, is described as a large hairy creature that walks on 2 legs. Sometimes there's even in accounts a description of a foul odor that resembles that of a skunk. So a skunk ape is a relatively new name for our mysterious cryptid. So early accounts of cryptids across North America often do sound somewhat similar and use a lot of the same terminology. So I'm going to read some accounts from over the years, and you can guess in the chat box whether it's a skunk ape or a Bigfoot sighting. All right, so to start off, we have this first one from 1900. It had the figure of a man about 4 feet high. It was stark naked and covered with short, shaggy black hair. We have 1 vote for skunk ape, 2 votes for skunk ape. Seems to be the general consensus. All right.
Are we ready for the big reveal?
I think we are. Yes, it is a believed depiction of a skunk ape. So this 1900 account was published in the Pensacola News. Like I said, it's believed to be an early skunk ape description of what is described as a wild man in Kissimmee. So like I said, it was a figure of a man about 4 feet high, covered in short, shaggy black hair. When someone tried to approach this creature or individual, it was tracked back to the swamp. All right, number 2. In 1851, quote, he was of gigantic stature, the body being covered in hair, his footprints measured 13 inches each. Already getting some votes for Bigfoot. Are you ready, Catherine? So yes, I think this one was a little bit easier, but this is believed to be an early Bigfoot description. So this account describes an encounter in Arkansas. If I know it's kind of probably small to read, but it describes a creature that has an unmistakable likeness of humanity. And this is a wild man who for many years in Arkansas was often seen by hunters. And the description is often the same and often aligned with Bigfoot descriptions of today. Right, getting a little bit newer. So 1971, grayish, and it looked like it had sores on its body and face, had extremely long arms and fingers, very large feet. We have some for Bigfoot, some for Skunk Ape. I believe that one. Back and forth. All right, so this one's a little more divided, we could say. All right, you ready, Catherine, for the big reveal? So this one is actually a skunk ape. So published in the Palm Beach Post, this more contemporary encounter does actually name the creature as a skunk ape or Everglades ape. It even says skunk ape or whatever. It's noisy. And this account includes this lovely drawing of this creature that was pestering a family down in South Florida, and even includes a description of a baby skunk ape that said it was reddish brown in color. And when the woman who encountered it tried to pet the baby skunk ape, she said the animal clawed at her ankle and ran into the bushes. So probably one of the only descriptions of a baby skunk ape, but there's more than one. So last but not least, 1874, a ghost covered with hair and about the size of a horse. One for skunk, one for Bigfoot. Skunkfoot, that's a good one. All right, another one that's a little divided. Okay, we're ready, Catherine. So this is another skunk ape. While not true to the typical skunk ape description, this is still believed to be an early encounter with Florida's mysterious cryptid. Though, as I mentioned, this one was from 1874. The first reported, or believed to be the first reported account of a skunk ape is from 1818. And that would have been up in North Florida. And it was a farmer who went into his cotton warehouse and saw a collection of 4-foot creatures covered in hair who had kind of taken home in his land. So when he approached them, they ran away. I did not include that in this one, but this 1874 account of a ghost in Key West is one of the early accounts as well.
All right, thank you everybody for playing.
So regardless of if you believe in skunk ape or Bigfoot or skunkfoot, as we've now named, there are many versions of mysterious cryptids all over the world. And even early tales of some animals we recognize today, such as gorillas or giant squids, even started off as myths of their own. So with that, I will leave you with this quote from Jane Goodall. who said, I don't know if these creatures exist. All I know is that everywhere I've been, there are tales of them and there are people who say they've seen them. So I'm not going, chat box is in the way. So I'm not going to go out and say they're not there. There's something, and it's very strange, and I find it extremely fascinating.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today to share a little bit about our local wildlife and the stories that have followed them through the years. We would be happy to answer any questions if you'd like to type them in the chat box.
Can you hear me, Catherine?
Yes.
Okay. So while we wait for everyone to put their questions in the chat box, if anyone has them, I do have a question. In your research, either you or Melissa in your research, have you come across any other cryptids that are known in Florida or that are believed to live in Florida, or is skunk ape really our claim to the cryptid world?
It's hard to say because, as I mentioned, since skunk ape is a relatively new term, I think that's kind of what's been coined as anything that would fall under a cryptid description. There was one of a swamp yeti, I think, at one point, but I don't know if that name ever really stuck. I think swamp ape was kind of the one that really held the most, and people associate that with Florida.
Yeah, there are mentions, but nothing as ubiquitous and common as the skunk ape, for sure.
Gotcha.
Great question.
All right. Well, I haven't seen any other questions come through, so just a lot of thank yous and a lot of we enjoyed the program, so that's always great. We appreciate those as well. So I guess we can go ahead and wrap up if you want to put up our last slide there. Okay, so thank you so much to Catherine and Melissa for leading our talk today. I also want to thank everyone who attended. We hope that you enjoyed our program. We do these lunch and learns every month, so they're the first Friday of every month. Next month we will be doing, you can see on your screen there, it's the second program listed. That's next month's lunch and learn, Finding the Fountain of Youth, the Truth Behind the Myth. So right now we are covering all things mythical in our programming. So here are just a few highlights of things that we have upcoming. So this, next Saturday, the 13th, Dr. Lou Vickers, who is one of the authorities on Florida tourism in our state, she's a scholar. She'll be leading a talk about Weeki Springs and their mythical mermaids for us. That is free, and it is also virtual, just like today's program. I already mentioned the lunch and learn we have on the screen there. Saturday, December 4th is a great opportunity to come see the exhibition. If you haven't, that's a free day. And for those of you who have kiddos, this is a really family-friendly exhibition, although it is great for adults too. But on that day in particular, we will have some activities for families, activities for all the kiddos that you may want to bring. But if you don't have kiddos, please just still come and see the museum and the exhibit for free that day. And then on December 12th, a program that I'm personally very excited for, it's the kickoff to our Mythical Morning series. We'll have 3 sessions, and the topic for December 12th is dragons. So we're hosting Dragons and Drafts, so that's a fun 21 and up program. You can find information about all of these programs and the plethora of other things that we have going on at thehistorycenter.org/events. So I encourage you all to check that out. I encourage you all to go to our website and find out everything that we're doing, because we're doing lots of great things. And with that, I think we can go ahead and sign off. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to throw a couple of links in the chat. So I will leave this up for just another minute, so anybody can grab those that wants to. But Melissa and Catherine, please feel free to go ahead and log off whenever you need to. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much.